Yo, shalom. We back. GOP. I know it's been a minute. Work been crazy, but I wanted to go ahead and get this out there to the internet. You know what I'm saying? Um, Dealing with this topic because unbeknownst to some of y'all, I was supposed to debate this topic against Stillborn. I mean Robborn, and we want to debate, are the Hebrews victims of the slave trade? And by Hebrews, we're simply denoting the Israelites, Jews, so on and so forth. And I did an amazing presentation, but I designed that presentation as a debate. So it's been sitting on my hard drive and told, don't release it. Wait for this brother to try to make the debate happen again. I'm done waiting. I want to give this content to the people, which is evidence for Hebrews being victims of the actual slave trade. This is actual and factual. What I'm going to present today, it's going to be material that's going to be scoffed at. It's going to be material that people are going to have to do ad hoc fallacies, post hoc fallacies, because you can't really get around what I'm about to present to y'all. And the original, like I said, the original presentation was I built it as in a debate, an argument towards my would have been opponent, which backed out, which is Rob Bourne. So I had to, redo and rework the facets of the presentation to make it more of a presentation instead of a debate, so you guys can absorb the information more properly. So today, what I'm presenting to you today is something I spent, some of my free time trying to, curate it for you guys to get the information. Pretty much what I'm going to provide to you is solid, concrete evidence that, yes, Hebrews, quote unquote, Israelites, Jews were victims of the slave trade. And it's pretty much emphatic. It's pretty much emphatic. All you doubters, all the people that scoff, there's nothing you can do. The truth is the truth is going out and being disseminated amongst people. And as a studied and astute Hebrew Israelite, this is what we do. You know what I'm saying? I pride myself on source material. I bought plenty of books on this topic to build and curate a new argument, a powerful argument for the existence of Jews amongst the victims of the slave trade and as victims of the slave trade. So that's what you guys will be getting today. Like I said, I was supposed to debate someone 3 months ago on this topic. It never happened. I had 161 slides ready for them. I reshaped and reformed that argument to bring it to you guys today. It's something I've been on my mind. Brothers didn't want me to do it. They want to wait for a debate. I'm not waiting for the debate. I just want to release the information. And, at a further date, if I can't get everything out today, I'll, revisit this and do it again. So the question that I have today, are the Hebrews victims of the slave trade? I'm going to emphatically answer that and tear down some walls, cultural biases along the way, because many of you Afrocentric scholars, quote unquote, on YouTube, you guys are very pseudo and disingenuous, and you discredit a whole race of people, a whole ethnic identity in favor of a pseudonym, which is where we all come under the auspice of these African teachers, and them saying, well, we're just Africans, that's all that matters. But you understand, these are pseudonyms and racial categories that were fairly recent, 1700s, 1800s, in that area. In that time, in that epoch, when we had our ancestors calling themselves and identifying themselves, prior to that, Jews, Moors, Saracens, you understand? We don't want to use those names. But this is just on the record. And that's what we're going to present today. This is what I'm going to give you guys today. With no further ado, let's go straight to the presentation. And like I said, hit that like button. This is the source. We will live up to the name, the source, by citing sources. See, a lot of your favorite YouTubers are too opinionated. They don't base they have baseless claims, don't base their information on sources. But here at the source, we pride ourselves by providing source material that you can all go and research and look up for yourselves. Like I said, I spent quite a few of my dollars on getting my hands on this information. I got over 7.5 gigs of books in my phone on Google because I got a Google Play account and Google Read on my phone. I had to buy a new memory card just for that. So I try to take this as serious as I can. This is not a hobby to me. This is something that's very important to me. So I take out the time to read. A lot of us don't read, and we just follow the status quo, or we go off of what YouTubers say and just, their word is law. But here is different, the source. So anyway, at the source, we're dealing with this. Are Hebrews victims of the slave trade? The answer is emphatically yes. I'll let you be the judge when I present this information to you, brothers and sisters that are watching now. Let's get into it, man. It's your boy Yashu, Scholastic Bully. I'm gonna show you why they call me that. Let me share my screen. I just wanted to get a few people in here. Let's see. Share my screen real quick for you, brothers and sisters can see this information. All right, you guys should be able to see now. Let me do this wide screen. If I'm not seeing the comments, it's because I'm reading off my presentation. So, bear with me if I don't respond to your comments immediately. Past videos I've done in the past, people complaining, you're not responding to. I can't see your comments while I'm sharing the screen and showing content. So keep that in mind. All right, so the question for today's video: are there Hebrews amongst the victims of the slave trade? And I titled this "A Demonstration of the Century." Now, first, before we get started, I want to deal with the effacing history in favor of hyphenated whiteness. And that's what we deal with the Moorish history. We deal with early European history. Any history outside of sub-Saharan Africa is pretty much hyphenated whiteness. And what they say is, if you're outside these areas, then you have to be white, which is not only is it false, you're being disingenuous when you apply that. If I find someone in Europe, then he's automatically pale or white. That's not true at all, according to history. You had a multiplicity of shades of skin tones and peoples throughout the whole world through numerous epochs of time. So anyone pushing that, you're just simply outdated and your information is disingenuous. And what we see on the record is effacing history in favor of hyphenated whiteness. The source I'm about to go into is The Jews and Blacks in Early Modern World by Jonathan Scorch, page number 286. It says the history of the colored Jews born of transracial racial sex in their congregation underwent almost complete erasure from the authors. I want you to understand that. Complete erasure from the authors. So that means people purposely try to remove this history, erase this history, or efface this history, snip it out of the historical records because they didn't want this to be seen. This is just facts. And you got a lot of you Afrocentrics that's banking on that because you want to push this black ideology, this African-only ideology that you're African and that's it, which is all pseudonyms, right? It's not a true identity that was held by the ancestors, right? So you look for this absence of evidence, so to speak, in favor of your erroneous arguments. When we can clearly see Jonathan Scorch is telling you that this history almost got completely wiped out. The question is why? Let's move on. The Jews known as Negroes of Europe. See, I'm not playing with this. Y'all got to get into the information. The source is Literature and Science by Monica Smits-Emons, Page number 149. Ethnological and popular literature repeatedly, not just one time, not a rare occurrence, not, accidentally, not just, a few references here, repeatedly refer to the Jews as the Negroes of Europe, as swarthy, look, African, mulatto, Jewish Negroid, and as members of a mongrel dark-skinned race. Because a lot of y'all are visual. So you go, well, where are these black Jews at? I mean, ethnological and popular literature repeatedly refer to these Jews as the Negroes of Europe. They use the term swarthy, African, mulatto, Jewish Negroid. What more do you want? To describe them phenotypically, to show that there's a phenotypic range amongst the Jews. So the phenotypic argument can no longer be used, because we can show a plethora of examples of these dark-skinned Jews in Amsterdam, Portugal, Spain, Russia. The second leader of the Prince Hall Masonry was a Jew, a Russian Jew, and he was black. You understand? So the phenotypic argument, the Jews are all crackers. Can't use that argument. Very disingenuous and false information. All right. We get now, I'm building up to it, man. This is the build up to answer the question. The progeny of the Jews returned to their ancestral religion. Progeny means the children and descendants of. The source I'm looking at is The Jews and Blacks in the Early Modern World by Jonathan Scorch. It's a very good book. I think it's going to run you about $70 on Amazon. Page number 253. As J.D. Oppenheim remarked, it was especially among the house of slaves that many Jewish traditions were known and were looked upon as master law, remain more or less in the memories of their offsprings. Now, this presentation is going to explain to you how all these Jews, all these slaves were able to retain these Jewish traditions, and their offsprings retain these Jewish traditions. Now, many will say that scoff, it's because they were converts and they had Jewish slave masters. There weren't that many Jewish slave masters in the Americas. A very small percentage of Jews had slaves in America. So you're going to say all these damn slaves understood these Jewish traditions based off this small amount of Ashkenazim that came over here like in the late 1700s? Doesn't make any sense. We're going to explain to you on the source why these Jewish traditions were held near and dear to these slaves, and how they retained it, and how was these traditions transmitted. Irrefutable data on the classification of the Jews. The sources, the Sephardic Atlantic Colonial Histories and Past Colonial Perspectives by Sina and Jonathan Scorch, page number 168. Early modern Jews were not automatically white. And that's what we're wiping out of your mind. Because a lot of people think these Jews have always been known to be white. Oh, yeah, okay. That's not what the scholars and historians are saying. So early modern Jews were not automatically white, but they were easily counted among black people. Do you see what's on the screen? Do you see what's coming out of the... Come on, man. I'm about to throw my phone. You know what I'm saying? And the brother I was going to debate, you going to stand in front of this? That's why you didn't want to do it. You knew what was coming, man. You know, when you was a child and you knew you messed up at school, or you had to come home with that felon report card, and you know your mama was going to whoop that ass. You didn't want to go home. You did everything you could. The day you tried to drag that day out, you missed the bus. You walked home. you didn't want that ass whooping. So, you know what I'm saying? But anyway, you can see on the screen, early modern Jews were not automatically white, but they were easily counted among black people. Why is that? Jewish slave trade via privateers. The source I'm going to use is The Jews of the Ottoman Empire and Turkish Republic, Stanford J. Shaw, page number 73. Yeah, I can go to the Ottoman. See, y'all are so close-minded. Y'all think slave trade is a small occurrence, a small amount of commerce. but even the Ottomans were involved in it. It says in the mid-16th century and after, Jews were enslaved by Christian and Muslim privateers in the Mediterranean who imprisoned them in places like Algiers, Tunis, Naples, and Canada and Candia, selling them into slavery. So there is no question that these Jews, which many of them were considered black, were being sold into slavery. This is something y'all ain't gonna learn nowhere else. Look at this. These slaves came off the boat with Quranic and biblical knowledge. South Carolina's Turkish People, A History and Ethnology by Tara Ann and Glenn Browder, page number 77. African slaves from regions of Islamic influence in the Old World, including some who were literate in the Arabic language and knowledgeable of the Quran and the Bible, were imported and distributed throughout the southeastern colonies and states. These slaves were being sold to the Americas. These are victims of the slave trade. They're literate in the Arabic language and they know about the Quran and the Bible. Now, that destroys the myth that slaves didn't know anything about the Bible until they slave masters taught them. You hear that a lot. No, a lot of them, a considerable amount, were already equipped with that knowledge. And it deals with ancestry. So there's no question to the return of the ancestral identity of these people, Black Jews in Africa and Americas, to the Parfit, page number 73 and 74. Following the Battle of Atwa, a number of Black churches in the United States started developing the literalist notion that the Israelites of old were Black African. One such was the church founder in Wrightsville, a small rural village south of Little Rock, Arkansas, by William Christian, who was born into slavery in Mississippi in 1856. So this is a descendant of a slave carrying these notions. His message was essentially that Adam, King David, King Solomon, Job, Jeremiah, Moses' wife, the Queen of Sheba, and Jesus Christ were all Black. So you had these slaves carrying these notions. And we showed you that these Negroes were once in Europe. These were Jews. The Jews were known as the Negroes of Europe. So, and we showed and proved that they were being captured by Muslim and Christian privateers and being sold into slavery. So you have these people being caught in various parts of the world, including Africa and outside Africa, and then being transmitted into the Americas. And they're carrying this notion that we're Israelites. They're carrying Jewish customs. They're carrying the laws. They're carrying the understanding of the Bible with them. Why? Because this was passed down onto the Jewish progeny. It's going to get deeper. Untold History of Jewish Slavery. This is Jews in the American Slave Trade by Saul S. Friedman, page number 40. Most European Jews live on the margin of Christian society and continue to suffer most of the legal disabilities associated with slavery. Why? Because they were victims of the slave trade. Let's go. Ladino means non-Iberian. E.g. means, for example, Jews and slaves. So when we see the term Ladino, it could mean Jew or slave. But Ladino is the language of the Jews. It's Spanish and Hebrew, right? It's an amalgamation of the two. So when we see these Latinos, which were the first slaves in the transatlantic slave trade, we can refer back to these Jews that were being sold in the Valencia market, which is in Spain. Lancados mean people of Portuguese origin living in Guinea in the 16th and 17th centuries. These people were also known as Tongomayos. And the source for that is the rise of transatlantic slave trade in Western Africa, 1300 to 1589 by Toby Green, page number 2324. Ladino applied to the Jews, which is pertinent dealing with transatlantic slave trade because the first slaves were the first slaves sold to the Americas. Many West African customs mirror Israelite customs because that's how you attack it. Oh, these people are predominantly from West Africa. Okay, many of their customs mirror Israelite customs, which explain what we read earlier, these Jewish customs being transmitted to their progeny. The book is The Soul of Judaism, Jews of African Descent in America by Bruce D. Haynes, page number 124, 125. A number of factors contributed to the Negro's identification with ancient Israel. The majority of Africans in North America were brought from West African societies, which regularly practiced ritual circumcision and ritual slaughter animals in the separation of women during menstruation. So now you know why we brought out that slide earlier. That many of these Jewish laws were master laws in the households of the slaves. The Big Black Rabbi of the Synagogue of London, Jews and Blacks in the Early Modern World, by Jonathan Scorch, page number 180. An Englishman, John Greenhay, visited the Jews synagogue in London and wrote a friend about it in 1662, describing the chief ruler, probably the president of Parnassium, as a very rich merchant, a big, black, fierce, and stern man. This was his physical description. So if anybody telling you all these Jews are white, none of them black, they're lying. It says at the letter's end, Greenhay reiterated with ethnographic precision that the 100 or so Jews he saw at the synagogue are all generally black, so as they may be distinguished from Spaniards or native Greeks. So we seeing these Jews in these synagogues, we seeing these Sephardic Jews, the Sephardim, we seeing them being victims of the slave trade, being sold into slavery, being oppressed, and we're seeing their customs through diffusion coming into the Americas, being in the households of the slaves. Doesn't take a great mathematician to figure this problem out. Jews being sold into the Americas. This directly answers the topic, the question, are there Hebrews amongst the victims of the slave trade? World Encyclopedia of Black Peoples Conspectus by Harry Waldman, page number 243 states, 1532, by cedulas prescribing the dispatch of any Moorish, Jewish, Ladino, or mulatto slaves to the Spanish-controlled sections of the New World. So what does this tell you? There's a law, which is a cedula, which was special licenses that you would have to attain in 1532 to sell these type of slaves. Meaning these slaves were being sold, Moorish and Jewish and Ladino. Those three are the same thing. And I'm going to prove that. They were all being sold to the Spanish-controlled sections of the New World, which was the islands in the Circum-Caribbean, right? Santo Domingo, not Puerto Rico, Cuba, these places, right? Jamaica, so on and so forth. And we have proof of these Jews being in West Africa as well, and we see them being transmitted. We see the customs coming over here, and now we know why through this presentation. The Rechabites penetrated the Sahara. This is the Travels in North Africa by Nahum Slutz, page number 344. We are beginning to learn now of a great migration in the time of Muhammad, or even before, in the famous year of the elephant. Many Jews were forced into Arabia. We are told that the Yahud Shabar, the Rakab, a tribe of shepherds and agriculturalists, interpret horsemen who at one time camped on the shores of the Red Sea and finally crossed the Sudan and penetrated to the farthest points of Sahara. So there's no question whether or not there were Jews in these areas, and no question whether or not many of them were black, and there's no question whether or not that these people were victims of the slave trade. Jews in Africa, here we go. Jews and Africans were victims of the slave trade. Source, Healing in the Homeland, Haitian Voodoo Tradition by Margaret Mitchell Armin, page number 59. Jewish captives in the continuing war against Moorish cities and Muslim slaves were sold in the Valencia market. This may account for Jews and Africans sold in the slave market. So again, are the Hebrews amongst the victims of the slave trade? You're damn right they are. It's historical. It's just the truth. Sao Tome, Cape Verde, the coast of Guyana. These people were slaves, being involved in slave raids. The Bihango people selling them to the Portuguese, and the Portuguese would disperse them into Portuguese colonies like Cayenne, Brazil, Suriname. It gets deeper, man. Spain sold Jewish slaves from Algeria. The Jews of North Africa by Sarah Taib Carlene, page number 31. In 1512, Spain invaded Oran and Bougie and sold a great number of Jews from these cities as slaves. I mean, I could stop. I could stop now, and the point will be cemented and solidified. I could just end the video. You understand? Because the question of the day was, are the Hebrews amongst the victims of the slave trade? Clearly showing you. I started off giving you the phenotypic range, the customs. I gave you cultural diffusion. So these people were black. These people did end up as slaves. These people were sold into the Americas. We showed you the cedulas, which are licenses that you had to get from the Spanish government in 1532. Before then, you didn't need a license. So these people were already being transferred and sold in this slave trade. See, a lot of y'all think it started in 1619. Slaves were being transmitted into Spanish colonial America as early as 1501. Many names describing the same people. I want y'all to remember this name. The source is Portuguese Style and Luso-African Identity by Peter Mark, page number 4. Luso-Africans, mulattoes, lancaros, and tangomayos. So these Luso-Africans were very pertinent in history and dealing with the question and answering the question of the day. Are there Hebrews amongst the victims of the slave trade? Castilian Jews are victims of the slave trade. A History of the Inquisition of Spain. Henry Charles Lee, page number 141. In the confusion following the invasion of Charles VIII in 1495, the people arose against them, which are the Jews. Many abandoned their religion to escape slaughter or slavery. Many were carried off to distant lands and sold as slaves. Jews confirmed sold as slaves. History of St. Thomas, i.e. Sao Tome. The Jew in the Medieval World, a source book, 315 to 1791. Jacob Rader, Marcus is the author, page number 61. All Spanish Jews who were still in Portugal in 1493 were enslaved by King John, 1481 to 1495. The children were sent to the Isle of St. Thomas off the coast of Africa. Why is that pertinent? Let me show you. Sao Tome, which was filled with Jews, first wave of slaves came from this island. The first wave of slaves came from this island. This is from the Institute of American History online article, The Iberian Roots of Transatlantic Slave Trade, 1440, 1640. You can get that from gilderlehrman.org. The first slave trade voyage known to have sailed directly from Africa to the Americas arrived in Santo Domingo on the island Hispaniola in 1525. The ship's cargo consisted of nearly 200 captives purchased in Sao Tome. Several additional slave ships disembarked enslaved Africans in Hispaniola, Cuba, Puerto Rico, and Jamaica during the late 1520s and 1530s. So you have this history of Jews being transferred to Sao Tome. Then you have the history of the first major slave trade voyage coming from Sao Tome into the Spanish-controlled areas of the Americas. Direct descendants of Jews. The source is Naomi. The history of Western Mandinka state through the 18th century. Donald R. Wright is the author, page number 148. Initially, the Luso-African descendants of lancaros, which mean castaways, and local Africans. Then augmented after the mid-17th century by Anglo and Franco-Africans. And some owned African slaves, yet were slaves of Africans. So yes, you did have, because that'd be an argument, oh, they were owners of slaves. Yes, you did have black people involved in the slave trade. But the point is, these Luso-Africans were also victims of the slave trades, and they were slaves. The acculturation of African practices, I brought this up because you can see this amongst the Luso-Africans. It's a source, Portuguese Style and Luso-African Identity, Peter Mark, page number 4. Luso-African religion was actually an amalgam of Christian, get this, Christian, Jewish, and African practices. So when you see these slaves in these slave homes carrying these Jewish practices and holding it as master law, it's no question where they come from. Galley slaves of the Circum-Caribbean. Back from Barbary is the source, Gilly Lee Wells, page number 26. The occasional Jew and even some converts made up approximately a quarter of all galley slaves. These galley slaves was Spain capturing these Lancanos, these Jews, and making them work in the Circum-Caribbean. which is the Spanish colonial regions of America. This is recorded history. Jews had to work as galley slaves. The African Bihogos were capturing Luso-Africans and selling them to slave traders. Who are these Luso-Africans? Descendants of Jews. It says source, Portuguese style and Luso-African identity, Peter Mark, page number 25 and 26. In addition, at the beginning of the 17th century, all coastal peoples, including the Portuguese, were subject to the repeated raids by Bihogos, warriors from the adjacent Bisagos archipelago. Now, so these Portuguese, which the Luso-Africans, were subject to these raids, and these raids led to them being captured and being sold into the American markets. The slave raids of Native Africans contributed greatly to the slave trade. Source Atlantic African in the Spanish Caribbean, 1570 and 1640 by David Wheat, page number 64. Bihago raiders would tie them up and carry them back to their own lands, where captives would then be sold to waiting Portuguese ships. Iberian merchants thus acquired innumerable blacks in the posts of the Bihogos. So the merchants would come, pick them up at the coast of Bihogos, and what? Redistribute them into colonial Portuguese parts of America to be slaves. Material cultures carried to the Americas by the Luso-Africans. This is how we know, because we can see the material culture coming from the Luso-Africans from the coast of Guyana, Cape Verde, Sao Tome, and the Canary Islands, right? We can see the diffusion. It's called cultural diffusion. The source is Portuguese style and Luso-African identity, Peter Mark again. Descriptions of the Luso-African dwellings in 17th century illustrations of Afro-Brazilian architecture offer graphic evidence of the movement of people, European and Euro-African traders, as well as African slaves between Guyana coast and Brazil. So we have graphic evidence. We have cultural diffusion. We can see the way the dwellings that they built were identical to these Euro-African people or Luso-African people, which are people of Jewish descent, being brought from the Guyana coast all the way to the Brazil. So are there Hebrews amongst the victims of the slave trade? You're damn right. The descendants of the Jews proliferated Africa, encompassing the globe. Essays, J.A. Effacing is the author, page number 77. The Portuguese and their Luso-African offsprings included a substantial number of new Christians, descendants of forcibly converted Portuguese Jews. These new Christians are people that had to convert to Christianity or get killed. And we see these Luso-Africans proliferating Africa, being victims of the slave trade. We see their culture being carried from the coast of Guyana all the way to Brazil. Black Brazilian Jews, descendants of the Black Jews. The soul of Judaism is the source. Jews of African descent in America. Bruce D. Haynes. I've been in touch with a community in Brazil in Sao Paulo. 200,000 Brazilians who the father is Jewish and the mother is African, of African descent. Black Brazilian. So this is modern times Bruce D. Haynes seeing these descendants of these Brazilians claiming Jewish lineage. And they can prove it. Over 200,000. Why? Because of this history, this rich history. The Jew, Portuguese, and Negro can be seen in one person. Source, Atlantic Africa and Spanish Caribbean, 1570 to 1640. David Wheat, page number 161 to 162. In settlements throughout the Spanish Caribbean, individuals described as Portuguese blacks or Afro-Portuguese Creoles worked alongside diasporic Africans as fellow slaves and free people of color. These Portuguese blacks are what? Luso-African. What does Luso mean? Portuguese. And who are these Luso-Africans consisted of? New Christians, Jews, people that were fleeing persecution. So yes, they were victims of the slave trade. They were working as slaves in the Americas, in the Caribbean, in the Spanish and Portuguese ruled colonial areas of America. Patrilineal descent determines pedigree, the soul of Judaism as well, by Bruce D. Haynes, page number 87. Sephardic Jews subscribed to the ancient practice of patrilineal descent, and many of these Luso-Africans were descended from Jewish fathers. Dark Iberians include the Jews and the Moors. Source genealogy of Gwendolyn Ruth Hicks, Book 1. Gwen Higdon is the author, page number 12. They soon found that white southern slave owners were crueler than the British loyalists. Many white slave owners considered the dark-skinned Iberians dark enough to be sold as slaves. This will include what we brought up in the beginning of the presentation, that the Jews were these dark-skinned Iberians. The Moors as well, but we're going to show you that the Moors pretty much Jews as well. And these people were victims of the slave trade as well. First slaves came from Spain. We brought that up earlier. The source Healing in the Homeland by Margaret Mitchell, page number 59. Jewish captives in the continued war against Moor cities and Muslim slaves were sold in the Valencia market. This may account for Jews and Africans being sold in the slave market in early years. We read this prior. Now, let's get the definition of what a Moor, a Saracen, is, because they're all synonymous. And the source is the evolution of origins of slaves sold in Spain from the late Middle Ages till the 18th century by Aurelia Cazares. It was April 2013 when they published it, and it's the Forensic University Press. It's where you can find it. Saracen was defined in the Castilian Dictionary, published in 1611, as a synonym of Moro, which is where you get Moor from. And the definition further stated that they claimed to be descendant of from Sarah. Now, the descendants of Sarah are the Israelites. You know what I'm saying? Point blank. They're not the Ishmaelites, they're the Israelites. So when we're looking at Moors, Saracens, and Israelites, we can say that's actually synonymous. Moors and convicts, including Jews. Source, South Carolina's Turkish People, A History and Ethnology. Terry Ann and Glenn Browder, page number 83 and 84. Prior to the massive transatlantic slave trade, Moorish captives from Mediterranean conflicts were sent to work in Spanish Portuguese colonies in the Americas. And remember, these Moorish people were also were called Saracens, and these Saracens denoted the sons of Sarah, and they were victims of the slave trade, which would mean, yes, emphatically, Hebrews, Israelites, Jews were victims of the slave trade. Now we got the Negro Jews of North Africa, which what we call these people Moors. Watch this. Source, Jews, Race, and Environment by Maurice Fishberg, page number 143. The author was unable to distinguish a Jew from a Mohammedan. This is an Islamic person. He could not distinguish the two. While passing along the streets of Algiers, Constantine, and Tunis, it is remarkable that among the non-Jewish natives, there are seen many Jews of Negroid type showing the decided Negro infusion. So a lot of these Moors, these Jews, they look Negro in North Africa, which a lot of slaves came from. See, a lot of y'all focus on, oh, these people had to come from below that area. No, you had people come from Algiers, Constantine, and Tunis. And you cannot distinguish the Jew from the Mohammedan now. The Moors were enslaved in the Americas. South Carolina Turkish People, A History and Ethnology. Terry Ann and Glenn Browder, again, page number 84. Historian Herbert Klein mentioned that Moorish captives proceeded and coexisted with African slaves in the Caribbean. Jews worked tobacco fields of Haiti. This is Healing in the Homeland by Margaret Mitchell, again, page number 73. Ngagis comprised of people escaping religious and political oppression. They were poor Frenchmen influenced by the desire to try their luck in the colonies, and Jews trying to make a new life for themselves away from European Inquisition. The Ngagis were suitable to work in the tobacco field with the enslaved Africans. Luso-Africans sold in the Caribbean. I'm just pretty much stacking a deck at this point, man. Look, source Atlantic Africa in the Spanish Caribbean, 1570 to 1640, David Wheat, page number 146 to 147. So although Spanish blacks are occasionally mentioned, most Afro-Iberians in the early colonial Spanish Caribbean were described as Portuguese. Thus, in the late 1570s, 2 enslaved men sold in Havana, each described as a black slave and as Portuguese. And we know these black Portuguese were what we call Luso-African, which were descendants of Jews. Again, more about the Bihago slave raids, Atlantic Africa and Spanish Caribbean, 1570 to 1640. David Wheat, page number 64 and 65. Echoing earlier Portuguese language sources, Scandoval describes a ceremony conducted before Bihogo slave expeditions for sacrificing wine and animal under their ancestors. Raiding parties members were obliged to fight and capture whomever they might encounter, even should happen upon their relatives, their friends, acquaintances, or others from the same island. And we know, we read earlier, many of these people were victims were Luso-Africans. Luso-African Jews came in waves via the slave trade. Atlantic African and the Spanish Caribbean by David Wheat is the source again, page number 151. It says, in Cartagena, the flow of Portuguese migrants never abated during the 17th century. A second slave trade surge lasting from the 1610s through the first half of the 1620s brought even larger numbers of Portuguese and Luso-Africans to the city. This is how Luso-Africans came over here through a slave trade surge. Do y'all understand what I'm reading? These Luso-Africans were Jewish. Watch, it says, although each would later be accused of crypto-Jewish practices. This is what the Luso-Africans were being accused of. Being Jew, practicing Jewish faith in secret. That's what crypto-Jewish practices is. And judged by the Inquisition. At least 4 are known to have initially arrived on slave ships departing from Angola, Sao Tome, and Guyana. I could just end the presentation here. Do I need to keep reading? What's the point? But this is what happens when you argue from absolutes, saying that people, all these people had nothing to do with Jews, and you argue for the absolutes, and you get defeated every time. This is why it was going to be a bloodbath if I debated Rawborn. You understand? So these Luso-Africans, which were accused of practicing these Jewish practices, were indeed victims of the slave trade. End of discussion. Latinos, e.g. means, for example, Jews were the first to be sold to Americas. The syntax of Cape Verdean Creole by Marlies, page number 16 and 17. As a depository, Cape Verde kept many of its incoming slaves, but it was also a place where Latino slaves who were taught Portuguese were trained for their ultimate re-exportation to the more profitable markets of the Americas. So Latinos, which were known as Jews, and Luso-Africans known as Jews, being sold into being sold into the Americas, to the American slave markets. So when I read that slide from the beginning, that many of these slaves held Jewish practices as master law, now you know why. Because many of them were descended from these Portuguese, Spanish, Ladino, Luso-African, Tongo-Mayo fathers, man. They're their progeny. It makes sense. It's called the fusion. The Sephardi became known as the Tongo-Mayos in the Portuguese regions of Western Africa. Source: Bridging the Early Modern Atlantic World by Dr. Caroline A. Williams, page number 176. Sephardi traders who formed an important part of the first wave of Lancados and Tongo-Mayos. Renegade private trader and settlers. The account of slavery after expulsion. The source of persecution of the Jews and the Muslims of Portugal by Francois Sawyer, page number 129. Not all Castilian Jews had left by expiry of the delay accorded to them by Giles II. The fate of these Castilian Jews enslaved by Giles II, we are to believe Elijah Capsali. The first to be enslaved were those Jews who attempted to enter Portugal without paying the interest tax and were caught. The enslavement of all Jews in Portugal. Again, same source, a great number of humble and destitute people whose means were insufficient were not able to pay the tax, and thinking that they would be able to dupe the king were duped themselves, for he pursued them all, from the greatest to the smallest, for it was quite true that nothing can be hidden from the king. Thus he took them as slaves and servants. This is the history that you guys are not being taught, and then it's being ignored. Again, Jews victim of the slave trade. Transactions of the Jewish Historical Society of England Volumes 31 and 32, page number 114 says King Charles II ordered all Castilian Jews illegally remaining in Portugal after the time limit had expired to be enslaved, and he sold them off to whoever would buy them. I mean, should I stop? Should I keep going? At this point, it's just starting to get redundant. The answer was already emphatically answered. Jewish slaves in Sao Tome and the location where the first set of slaves came from that served in American markets. Source: the transatlantic slave trade from the West Africa proceedings of the seminar held in the Center of African Studies, University of Edinburgh, 4th and 5th June 1965, page number 75. Slaves from Benin were taken to the offshore equatorial islands, notably Sao Tome. There, many of them worked on sugar plantations alongside white convicts and Castilian Jews sent out from Portugal. This is the history you guys don't know. These people that was working on these equatorial islands, the Canary Islands, Sao Tome, Cape Verde, Principe, it was inundated by these Castilian Jews. They was being kicked out of Portugal and Spain and being forced to be slaves in Sao Tome. And we read the source earlier that the first major wave of slaves, those 200 slaves, came from Sao Tome. And many of these slaves were Castilian Jews. Historicity of the Jewish slave account. Source: Delaware's Forgotten Folk, University of Pennsylvania, 1943, by Westlager. In 711 AD, the Moors crossed the Straits of Gibraltar and began their conquest on the Spanish peninsula. After governing Spain for 800 years, the Moors were defeated by the Christians, and many of the descendants were sold to the slave traders, who brought them to shackles to America. Some of these Moors were Mozarabis or Sephardic Jews. It's getting redundant. Luso-Africans were slaves as well. Atlantic Africa and Spanish Caribbean, 1570 to 1640, by David Wheat again, pages number 64, and then the following quote is 279 and 280. Iberian and Luso-African passengers on these voyages were also accompanied by domestic slaves, personal servants, and family members, all of whom were very likely to be the Luso-African or sub-Africans too. So even the slaves were Luso-African, and they were being brought into the colonial Americas. In the seaports throughout the early Spanish Caribbean, these migrants constituted part of the region's social fabric and extension of cross-ethnic contacts that had taken place earlier in Western Africa. Watch this. Listen to this, man. I might end it over here. I'm giving y'all too much. Like, this is getting redundant. The question has already been answered. A rebel maroon ex-slave considered to be one with Jews. The History of Jamaica by Edward Long, page number 459. You Jews, said he, in our nation, meaning the Coromantans, ought to consider ourselves as the same. This is a maroon ex-slave telling this Jew that we're the same. The genealogy backs the claim of Sephardic Jews. The Jewish nation, the Caribbean, Spanish, Portuguese, Jewish settlements in the Caribbean and the Guyanas by Arbel, page number 36 in the introduction. The colored Jews formed a brotherhood of mulatto Jews in 1779 called the Darhe Yasharam and began their struggle for complete acceptance in the Jewish community. Success came very gradually, only after proving they were descendants of Spanish and Portuguese Jews. I'm going to stop the presentation, man. I don't think y'all... I mean, what else? Do I need to keep going? Black Jews can be identified by descent. Same source, page number 73. It is resolved that all Jewish mulattoes, blacks, mestizos, and casticas who carry the name are known to be descendants of Portuguese, Spanish nation will be considered their congregant. These are Jews by birth, man, not by convert, not by conversion, by birth. White does not always denote skin color. I mean, I mean, should I keep going? Okay, 2 Jewish Moors captured and sent to Carolina. This is Muslim slaves. Go back. Muslim Slaves by James W. Hagee, page number 26. In 1786, 2 men appeared in Charleston dressed in the Moorish habit and aroused a great deal of suspicion by their strange ways. Therefore, an officer of law began to try to question them. The Moors, he found, did not know English and resented the suspicious lawmen. According to the officer, the men became impertinent and vulgar. As a result, the lawman gave one of the followers a little manual correction by the way of reforming his manners. By the time the mob had gathered and authorities feared a riot might break out. Finally, they determined the 2 were of the Jewish nation. They then took the men home of a woman in East Bay Street who understood their language. She found that the 2 had sailed from Algeria to Virginia, where they had been arrested on suspicion of being Algerians. They had then traveled overland to South Carolina. So you had these Moors, these people, they said they're the Moorish habit. And we read earlier that the Mohammedans, the Moors, and Jews could not be distinguished in Algeria and North Africa and Tunis. And you see them over here and being identified as Jews. Phenotype of the original Jewish population, because you guys use a phenotype argument all the time. This is from The Jew and Negro, being a study of the Jewish ancestry and partial standpoint by Arthur Tamagi Abernethy, page number 9. The original Jews were therefore short, dark people of long-headed type. The original Jew and Negro were then descended from the same father. During the time of Richard Owen, dark-skinned Jews existed in Palestine on the classification of geographic distribution of mammalia, which is by Richard Owen, page number 96, 97. There are some Jews still lingering in the valleys of Jordan, having been oppressed by the successful conquerors of Syria for ages, a low race of people, and described by trustworthy travelers as being as black as any of the Ethiopian races. You know why it's important to use this source? Because a lot of people say, oh, black is a metaphor. When you see it, black means sick. Black, like, no, this is saying in comparison to the Ethiopian race, they black like the Ethiopian races. So you can't use that argument. Here's some Russian Jews here. Nero Prince, the Black Jew of the African Grand Lodge. To the left is in Boston in 1808. Nero Prince was elected as the second Grand Master of the African Grand Lodge of the Masons. First of all, how is this? Matter of fact, let me just keep reading. Thereafter, called the Prince Hall Grand Lodge in honor of the great Grand Master, who had died in December 1807. Prince had been one of the organizers and first officers of the African Lodge when it was founded in 1791. By one account, Nero Prince was said to be a native of Russia, a Jew who identified with colored people. Wrestley reports that Prince was a skilled black cook who sailed Russia in 1810 as a leading Mason. Prince was certainly a possible link between the Czar's court and certain Negro circles in America. So this is a Jewish Negro that is an integral part of the African Grand Lodge. Was there since the beginning in 1791, and I believe he was the second ruler. You understand? The second Grand Master. Why y'all don't know this? Do people care to know this? This source, Russia and the Negro, by Allison Blakely, page number 17. And to back that source up, we have another source to the right, a booklet, Africans in Russia, by Leah Goldenhunger, herself a Russian Negro. She notes that the Tsarist officials frequently listed Negroes as Arabs and Jews. Source, Russia and the Negro, by Allison Blakely, page number 10. I mean, it's clear and abundant at this point. Jews of medieval Europe reputed as being black. For anybody using the phenotype argument, look, marks of distinction, Christian perception of Jews in high Middle Ages by Arvin M. Resnick. Regardless of whether only Jewish men or both men and women were understood to be dark complexion in the medieval Christian perception. Jews in Saracens is described as being black, using signifier of race. Medieval Identity Machines by Jeffrey Jerome Cohen, page number 277. In general, however, Saracens and Jews were the groups most susceptible to the representation as swarthy, Ethiopian, or black skin, making such darkness as a signifier of race. So anybody using this phenotypic argument, you're blown out of the water at this point. because there is an existence of black Jews. Okay, Jews were being sold as slaves via Spain. This is for reinforcement of what we brought out earlier about the Jews being victims of slaves, the Latinos being Jews, being sold in Sao Tome, Principe, the Canary Islands, the coast of Guyana into the Americas. Even more proof. If you look at this chart, it's a general overview of the geographic and ethnic origins of slaves sold in Spain during the 15th and 18th centuries. You look at right here, look. You got Saracens, the sons of Sarah, being sold right there in the 15th century. Ottoman Turks. And look, Jews of North Africans. Jews, North Africans, right here. From 15th to the 17th century, they have records of Jews of North African descent being sold. There's nothing you can say now. It's over. Compiled by the author based on doctoral theses and the historiography of slavery in Spain. The source is Evolution of the Origin of Slaves Sold in Spain from the late Middle Ages till the 18th century. Aurelia Martin Cazares, April 2013, in the Firenze University Press is where you can find this. Multiple Arab sources validate the ancient existence of Jews in Africa. So anybody think Jews weren't there? This is pretty easily debunked. The Black Jews of Africa by Edith Bruder, page number 137, says the family leaders who founded the Sakar declared themselves to be descendants of Jews of Tawat. In previous chapters, we examined evidence of Jews in the Saharan trade routes in the centuries old mention of the existence of Jewish groups in the Timbuktu region of Western Africa. Before and after Islamization and up to the 15th century. As early as the 12th century, al-Idrisi signaled a Jewish presence in the region of Timbuktu. In the 13th century, Ibn Said and Abizar gave similar information. So anybody saying, oh, well, Jews weren't in that area, Jews were in that area. And a considerable amount of them were victims of the slave trade. You can't get around that. Jewish cartography is proof of Jewish familiarity with West Africa. Cartography is map making. In order to make a map and map out a geographical location, you have to be in those locations. Source: The Black Jews in Africa by Edith Bruder, page number 137. As seen earlier, the contribution of cartographic school of Majorca in the 14th century provided convincing testimony on the precision of the knowledge of the Saharan Jews who were authorized by the responsive to carry their caravan trip during the Sabbath. So if they're able to make a map of West Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa under the Sahel, then they would have to be in those areas to understand those areas. It's just that simple. African Jews running from persecution. You know what? I'm going to end it here. I'm going to end it here, man. I'm going to end it here. Let me see what y'all. Let me check the temperature of the room real quick. Let me check the temperature of the room, man. What's going on, y'all? Talk to me, man. I've been going for about an hour. I've been going for about an hour. What's going on, y'all? What's happening? Their rebuttal will be that they're white. I started in the beginning and I showed emphatically that the Jews were always considered the Negroes in Europe, called Swarthy, African, so on and so forth. Aki, you're doing a great job. Appreciate it, man. I spent a lot of money on these books and a lot of time disseminating information and bringing this out. Let's see. A lot of y'all was commenting. Appreciate it, man. Appreciate it. You and I don't see eye to eye, but this is good information. Look, it's about the information at the end of the day, not personalities. You know what I mean? What's the name of the books? I called out each book before I read the source. You understand? I called out every book. I read the source. Let me keep going. See what y'all brothers were saying. Again, y'all was arguing with me while I was going. I'm not looking at the comments. Shalom Aki, I wish you would get together with Brother Benaiah Israel. I love the work he does on Hidden Hebrews, on the Spanish Inquisition. You got to do so much solid work. Shalom, brother. Shalom, man. I don't know who that brother is. Maybe I do. Let's see. Yeah, they hate when the truth come out. They can't refute it. So you listen, you can't refute history. The Luso-Africans, the Latinos were sold into slavery. Luso-Africans have been identified as direct descendants of Jews. You can't get around that. They direct descendants of Sephardim. That's nothing you can say to get around that. And their children and their progeny was found as slaves. And we see the cultural diffusion in Brazil with the dwellings they lived in. They lived in the same Luso-African dwellings they did in the coast of Guyana and the Canary Islands and so on and so forth. So there's no refutation to that. You just got to accept it. Unless you're going to be disingenuous. Cube of the Israelites brought here were, in my opinion, about 70% true. Israel about 25-30% converts. I can't put a percentage on it, but I can show you that this really happened. Let's see. What destroyed us more, slavery or welfare? Welfare. Because slavery ended. Emancipation Proclamation ended under Abraham Lincoln's cabinet. And then the death blow, the Reconstruction era, we was going through an economic boom. And then the death blow came with FDR's New Deal. And a lot of that stuff these Democrats pushed, I know it's off topic, pretty much erased all of our progress. How we victim in our history show, we provoke the father so bad. Give our hands. I don't understand that. Who are we talking to? This is Yashub, man. Great job. Appreciate it, brother. Thanks for the lesson. My first time. Yeah, man. I try to bring the heavy hitting information. These other brothers is microwave information, man. A lot of brothers is microwave information. Closing match. Yeah, I took my DNA test. I took 23andMe and Ancestry. I did Ancestry.com and I got my DNA results. What was Judas saying that they were brought into slavery? I understand that Gad, so-called Hispanics, were doing human sacrifice. Hey man, this class or presentation really didn't have anything to do with none of what you brought up. I mean, that's a complex question. If you believe in Deuteronomy 28, then I mean that would, a lot of people would say that. But you know, my whole purpose of making this was to show that the Jews were victims of the slave trade. So yeah, brother, like go back and watch the video. I provided a lot of information about these Geographic Jews. You know, let me just go in a little bit more, man. Maybe I should go in. Oh, you just tuned in? Yeah, we was going over all the Hebrews victims of the slave trade, and somebody was arguing with me in the comments. I'm not looking at the comments. Okay, Cube, you wanted some fame. So if I practice Islam, does that make me a Muslim? Yes, but still be a convert. I don't understand your argument. That makes no damn sense. We're talking about people that were born Jews. I got something for you. I'm not talking about people that just practiced it. They practice it because they descended from the progeny. Cube. And I know you guys don't want to debate the stuff, so it might as well just answer your question or your confusion, if you will. Let me share my screen. I'll give y'all a little bit more of what I had, man. Yeah, a little bit more. I just felt like it was getting redundant. I was just showing too much proof and evidence. You know what I'm saying? Killing the color argument. Okay, your African Jews were legally recognized through the IBD because the brother just said, it's not just about practicing customs. That's one part of the argument. You weren't listening. You were just being a scoffer. That's cool, but we're here for you. You African Jews were legally recognized due to IBD. If you don't know IBD, that's the methodology I've been using this whole time. Identification by descent. That's how I'm identifying these people. Source, the Princeton Companion to the Atlantic History, Joseph C. Miller, page number 302 and 303. Says, but by the early 17th century on the Senegambian coast in West Africa and Suriname, then the latter half of the 18th century, a sizable Jewish Euro-African subgroup arose. Let me say that again. A sizable Jewish Euro-African subgroup arose. In the later case, perhaps 10% of the population confessing Jews legally recognized as such by colonial government and by Jewish communal leaders. These Jewish Euro-African illustrate that African spiritual traditions, Christianity and Islam were not the only possibilities available to Africans and their free or enslaved descendants. These people were recognized by the colonial powers of that time as being Jews. Cube, you have no argument. This is called IBD, identification by descent. These people descend from Sephardim. They went to the coast of Guyana. They went to Senegambia, as we just read. They went to the Canary Islands. They were slaves on Sao Tome, Principe. They were subject to re-exploitation to colonial areas in America. You can't get around that. All you can do is scoff. I mean, what else? Sephardic Jews ended up in North America via South America, an early Jewish colony in Western Guyana by Samuel Opine. It says the history of colony of this colony is important to us in a connection with the history of the Jews in Brazil, Cayenne, and Suriname, which was closely connected, and probably also with that of the Jews, and has become a part of the United States. Let me see. How much more should I give y'all fighting this? I didn't want it to be that long. Jews asked for ships carry their nations over there. Look, this matches up with the historical accounts of Euro-African Jews. The source is Black Haiti by Blair Now's page number 18113. The slaves imported from Africa had come from the Gold Coast, the Ivory Coast, the coast of Angola, and the Slave Coast, all the way from the Gulf of Guyana and the Cape of Good Hope. They resembled most of the tribes of that dark and mysterious continent. Some were said to be descendants of Jews mixed with Negroes, and that's what we got. You got these Sephardim coming in, having relations with these natives of these African places and creating these children, what they're calling you African Jews, which were subject to slavery. There's no way around it. Ironclad argument. Dark descendants of Jews, a companion of global historical thought, is the source. If you look to the left of the screen, that's where I'm getting this stuff from. Wally Blackwell, page number 217, 218. In the case of the Portuguese Empire, one cannot ignore the importance of the deportation of the Sephardic population to Cape Verde or to Guyana in the first years of the 16th century. These Portuguese speakers became Luso-Africans and formed families of darker and darker skin without ever losing their Jewish shame. That has been my argument since the beginning of this. I built up to it. These Luso-Africans at Cape Verde, they were being re-exported into the Americas. We read that. And being sold as slaves. So therefore, Hebrews are the victims of the slave trade. For all the viewers out there. Negroes Terra. Black and white complexion Jews existed in 1130 CE. We already brought up the leader. Edict and expulsion. I mean, I can keep going and going and going. The Edict and Expulsion of Jewish Slaves, A History of the Inquisition of Spain by Henry Charles Lee, page number 142. That this savage edict was pitilessly enforced is manifested by several cases in 1500 and 1501. Moreover, all masters of Jewish slaves were ordered to send them out of the country within 2 months, unless they would submit to baptism. Spain was too holy of a land to be polluted with the presence of Jew, even in captivity. So if they sent them out of the land of Spain, they were ordered to do this in 1500 and 1501. Where were they going? They were being sold into Principe, Cape Verde, Sao Tome, and some of them ended up in early colonial America as slaves. Jewish look akin to the Negroes in the coast of Guyana. Look at this. Jews and the blacks in early modern world. Jonathan Scorch, page number 181. As late of 1753, during a debate in England over that year's Jewish Naturalization Act, one polemistic suggested that anyone who wanted to look Jewish should rub herself with walnut husks to fix such an undeniable hue and make your complete olive beauties with a lively complexion like that of a new Negro from the coast of Guyana. So he said, you want to look like a Jew, you got to make yourself look like a Negro from the coast of Guyana. This is what's written in the historical record. Y'all, man, that's why a lot of y'all are fool, man. Y'all don't deal with real research and methodology. Been using IBD this whole time, identification by descent. Slaves considered fellow Jews per Sephardic Jewry. Jews and blacks in early modern world, Jonathan Scorch, page number 252. In Curacayo, a 1754 decision of the Parnassium forbade lending money at interest to slaves. If one lent to a slave at interest, one would have transgressed his commandment to refrain from asking interest from a fellow Jew. They were considering these slaves as fellow Jews in 1754. Come on, man. Why? Because of this history about the Luso-Africans and these Latinos being sold as slaves. That's why. A Afro-Virginian, a converso, American Jewish History, volume 85, page number 212. In 1898, a Virginian, a Jewish convert to Christianity charged with wife beating, was described as a swarthy of complexion and of the Jewish extraction. Jews and Moors were getting captured and sold to the Caribbean. This is also from the South Carolina's Turkish People History and Ethnology by Terry Ann and Glenn Browder. I've been using this source in multiple slides. Page number 84. Most have probably been captured in amphibious raids conducted by Spanish naval forces on outright naval combat between 1613 and 1624. For example, Spain acquired 980 slaves from just 28 vessels captured in the Mediterranean. Initially, oarsmen were subsequently transferred to the Caribbean. They were removed far from their states in the areas corresponding to present-day Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, Egypt, and Sicily. This is where these people are getting captured and being sold to the Caribbeans to be galley slaves. Moorish captives and slavery. We brought up the Moors being called Saracens, being sons of Sarah. So by default, that's a Hebrew victims of the slave trade. Jews and the blacks, early modern world, page number 253. Slaves retained Jewish customs. It says a low level familiarity with Jewish practices seem to have been obtained by at least some slaves. Direct descendants of dark Sephardic Jews enslaved. I probably read this earlier. Naomi, The History of Western Mandinka State Through the 18th Century by Donald R. Wright, page number 148, says initially the Luso-African descendants of Lancados and local Africans, then augmented after the mid-17th century by Anglo and Franco-Africans, and some owned African slaves, yet some were slaves of Africans. Patrilineal descendants of Sephardi, Sephardi men and Jewish women of African heritage identity was passed through the fauna. Yeah, I'm going to end it here, man. I'm going to end it here. It's one slide I was looking for. The Jews of Cape Verde, The Forgotten Diaspora by Jewish Communities in West Africa and the Making of the Atlantic World by Peter Mark, page number 84-85. In fact, several original settlers who took on the public Jewish identity of Petite Côte between 1608 and 1612 were year Africans. In the view of 1590 reported intermarriage between Lancados and Guyana of Cape Verde and African women together. With Van Den Broek's observation, intriguing possibilities arise. Might not the year African children of Lancados who returned to Portugal from the Petite Côte have been among the first Portuguese new Christians who subsequently settled Joal or Portugal? And a lot of these people were subject to what we brought up earlier, the Bihogo slave raids, which put slaves in the market, and they ended in the Caribbean. Majority of the Portuguese on the coast of Guyana were Jews. Forgotten Diaspora, Peter Mark, page number 90 and 91. Again, my source will always be on the left. Majority of Portuguese people, let me go back. Majority of Portuguese people on the coast of Guyana are Danakal, and God grant that they are not pure Jews, and they live with the greatest ease, and one knows the ill will they have for Jesuits and what they are able to do here in Portugal and there in Guyana. So a lot of these people were Euro-African Jews in these areas. First account of West African culture via West African post-colonial period by Aludia Equiano. Y'all all know who this is. Page number 1921. It says, such is an imperfect sketch of my memory, furnished me with the manners and customs of people among which I first drew my breath. So he's given the understanding of the customs of the Igbo, right? And it's interesting what Tudor Parfit said about this, and that's what I want to get to. And I here cannot forbear suggesting that has long struck me very forcibly, namely the strong analogy which even by this sketch, imperfect as it is, appears to prevail in the manners and customs of my countrymen and those of the Jews before they reached the land of promise. For we had our circumcision as a rule, I believe, peculiar to that people. We had also our sacrifices and burnt offerings, our washings and purification, on the same occasion as they had, as a difference of color between the Eboan Africans and modern Jews. So watch this. That's black Jews in Africa. Oh, no. There it is. Black Jews in Africa and the Americas by Tudor Parfit. Now, this is what Tudor Parfit said about what Equiano said about the Igbos. It says, there is general agreement that some of what he wrote about ethnography of the Igbo appears authentic. Clearly, the main point in this passage is the comparison between Igbo manners and customs and those of the Jews. The comparison itself obviously does not come from his childhood memory, nor does he say it does. The passage conveys the kind of general impressions Equiano might easily have gleaned throughout his life from Igbos he met in America. So if he got this from Igbos in America, that would mean there was a cultural diffusion that he witnessed himself of Jewish customs by Igbos in America. And how did those Igbos get to America? Through the slave trade. All right, man, I'm going to end it there, man. I'm going to end it there. Stop sharing. I'm going to end it there. Shout out to the people that's watching. Let's see what y'all saying. Hey, no sweat, man. I want to make sure I get this presentation out. At least a majority of it. Yeah, they don't have an argument. These brothers don't have an argument. I mean, what do you say? Like what Tudor Parfit said, the most intelligent thing you could say about Equiano. Where did he get this information about Igbos? He had to have been in contact with Igbos in America, and they were showing him customs that were very similar to the Jews. That's cultural diffusion, man. Ain't no way around it. Y'all want me to keep going? Y'all funny, man. Well, this person right here, Plumantis 2069. Make sure you look at Benaya's Hidden Hebrew series. If and when you look them up, I hope you do, brother. Yeah, I'll check them out. I think maybe I have seen it, man. I'm not. Maybe I just don't know the name. What y'all saying? What was Judah saying? Even though your DNA might say Bantu or Yoruba or Igbo, it also show that you're more closer to the Limba. You have to show me that, man. We're all about the source here. You got to show me the source. Right? They don't have arguments, man. They don't have an argument against. You can't argue descent. You can't argue descent, man. These people descend. That's what your African Jew means. It means they descended from Jews. They got dark skin. They descend from Jews. I showed you that these people were victims of the slave trade, and there's plenty of sources illustrating that. Let me show y'all one more thing, man. And I promise you I'm gonna end this. Glad y'all enjoying it. We got about 30 people watching the live. And I know it's gonna do numbers. I had to get it out there, man. I had to get it out there. I had to. I never got to really present it. I wasn't going to be able to present all the information in the debate anyway, because I always load my debates, my slides for my debates with so many vantage points and so many angles that my opponent would definitely be, you know what I'm saying? Will definitely be overwhelmed. I'm going to present so much stuff to you that you got to answer. You're going to be overwhelmed. You know, you got to argue the Lancado, Latino, Tangamayo, everything, right? So watch this. Watch this. I'm gonna end it with this, because again, I was using IBD this whole time. Check this out. Check this out, y'all. Let me share my screen. Let me end it on this. Again, for the brother earlier, Cube came here and made this comment. If I practice it, does it make me stop? It's not about just practicing. It's IBD, identification by descent, Jews by birth, Sephardi legacy. The source is The Jews in the Caribbean by Jane S. Gerber, page number 192. Your African Jews were increasingly not converts, but rather born Jews. I'll say it again. Your African Jews were increasingly not converts, but rather born Jews. These Jews that I am bringing up in my argument are not people that just, hey, I like the sound of the religion. Hey, I like the custom. I want to practice the custom. These are people that were born legitimate Jews. End of the argument. There's nothing else to say. Man. And that's The Jews in Caribbean by Jane S. Gerber, page number 192, by the way. All right, let me check the temperature, man. I'm out of here. Yeah, I mean, that's it. I had to end it with a boom, brother. I had to end it with a boom. I focus my presentation on all the arguments I hear. Oh, they're white. Okay, I'm going to show you where these people were considered the Negroes of Europe. Oh, we don't have any evidence of them coming on slave ships. Okay, I'm going to show you the licenses that were prescribed by the Spanish government called cedulas that said you could sell Jews into the Caribbean. Oh, it wasn't that many of them. I showed you there was a wave of Luso-Africans, which are descendants of Jews, being sold as slaves. Like, there's nothing they can say now. You know? And then, they're all converts. No, these people were born Jews. They were patrilineal Jews. Hey, with that, man, it's the source. We're about citing the source, reading the information directly. You can keep your opinion. At the end of the day, man, it's your brother Yashul. I appreciate the love. Subscribe to the channel, Genesis 49er Source Debate League. Shout out to the Sourced Up Click. And we're going to keep doing what we do over here. This is why our competitors are mad. Because we bringing out source material, historicity, something these other cats don't do. Y'all just get on y'all preaching thing, man. Y'all just be up there preaching and proclaiming. But at the end of the day, the question of the day was answered. Are the Hebrews the victims of the slave trade? And the answer is emphatically yes. Yashul, Genesis 49ers, we signing out. Shalom.